Hello, and welcome back to Bella's Haven for Healing. Thank you for joining me in part 3 of the Developmental Trauma Trilogy. When a child grows up in a chronically unsafe, unstable, or emotionally neglectful environment, the body and brain adapt to survive. And those adaptations can later be misunderstood, not just by the world, but by the medical and mental health systems meant to help. Diagnosed as disorders instead of what they really are, symptoms of unhealed trauma. I want to be really clear before we go any further. I am not here to shame doctors or therapists. Many of them are doing their absolute best with the tools and training they were given. What I am saying is this. So many people have been labeled, medicated, or told they'll manage a condition for the rest of their lives, when what they actually needed was to be held, heard, and healed at the root. I want to reiterate that I am not a licensed medical professional, nor am I a guru. I am just here to help connect the dots through my own lived experiences and healing journey, as I have had diagnoses of nearly all of these, and that through my healing have completely been eliminated. Now, this isn't about throwing out a diagnosis. Many of these are real, and treatment can genuinely help. This is an invitation to ask a deeper question underneath the label, as two things can be true at the same time. You are not a disorder. You adapted. So let's walk through this together. Anxiety and depression are two of the most diagnosed conditions in the world, and I want to be really clear up front. These diagnoses are real. They cause real suffering, and for many people, treatment helps. This isn't about throwing that out. But I want to ask you something, and I'm asking because I've lived it. When I was in foster care and the court system, I was required to go to therapy and I was put on medication. Medication that didn't heal anything. It just numbed me. It put my mind and body into a state of feeling nothing at all. And I want you to consider, what if some of what gets labeled anxiety or depression is not a chemical malfunction that needs to be numbed? What if it's your nervous system doing exactly what it learned to do as a child in an environment that did not feel safe or consistent? Let's start with anxiety. As kids, many of us learned to read a room before we even walked into it. Was mom in a good or a bad mood today? Was dad chill or was his tone off? That type of hypervigilance was a survival skill, and it worked for a child trying to stay safe. But that same wiring doesn't just disappear when you turn 18. It follows you into adulthood, and it starts showing up as overthinking, high cortisol, high blood pressure, and honestly, paranoia. Your boss wants to talk to you, and your mind immediately jumps straight to, am I getting fired? Your partner says, we need to talk, and you're already bracing for a breakup. That is not you being dramatic. That's a nervous system that learned a long time ago that being caught off guard was dangerous. In trauma terms, this is sometimes called a mobilization state. Your body preparing for danger that already happened a long time ago, but it was never fully resolved. You are not overreacting. You are reacting to old, unresolved survival data. Now, depression. Depression can show up as an overall negative view of the world and the people in it. Zero energy, no will or desire to even get out of bed. And I mean that literally. Not because you're tired, but because there is no motivation there at all. Sometimes it looks like not having the desire to do basic things for yourself. Brushing your teeth, taking a shower, eating. Not because you don't know you should, but because the part of you that cares enough to do it feels like it's gone quiet. In trauma terms, this is often called the dorsal vagal state, the nervous system's last resort power down mode. after it's been overwhelmed too many times for too long. It is not weakness. It is your body pulling the emergency brake to protect you. And yes, depression can be its own diagnosis, but it can also be a symptom, a result of years of hearing negative comments from parents, siblings, a teacher, a boss, or a partner. Over time, we start to hyper focus on the negative because that's what got reinforced over and over as what to expect from the world. But here's what I want you to really sit with as we move through all of these conditions in this video. Whether you're in your 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, even your 80s, 90s, the symptoms you're carrying right now didn't just appear out of nowhere. They're very often traced back to something that happened when you were a newborn, or maybe age 3, 7, maybe age 13. Somewhere in that window from time of conception to age 25, when your nervous system was being built. And by no means was it just one singular event, but the compounding of events time after time after time. That disconnect between your adult self and the age you actually learn this pattern is going to be one of the biggest hurdles in healing, because you can't heal what you haven't connected the dots on. So as we go through each of these, I want you to ask yourself, how old was I when I first learned to feel this way? What was the event or the circumstance that caused that feeling? The next group is one I want to approach with a lot of care, because if you're dealing with any of these, you already know the exhaustion. And I don't just mean physical exhaustion. I mean the exhaustion of trying to explain pain that does not show up clearly on a scan or an x-ray, or fatigue that doesn't make sense next to a full night of sleep, or a doctor's face when you describe symptoms they cannot quite categorize. If you have ever sat across from a doctor who looked skeptical, who ran out of tests to order, who told you it was probably just stress, or handed you a diagnosis of a food intolerance because your gut can't settle down, I want you to hear this clearly. Your pain is real. Your exhaustion is real. And the frustration and disappointment you feel toward a medical system that couldn't quite figure you out, that is completely valid. Fibromyalgia, chronic pain, and chronic fatigue are conditions where the developmental trauma is increasingly being recognized as a root contributor. When a nervous system spends years, sometimes decades, in a state of chronic stress or threat detection, that stress doesn't just stay emotional. It gets stored in the muscles, the connective tissue, and the fascia. Widespread pain and unrelenting fatigue can be the body's long-term bill for years of bracing against a world that just did not feel safe. Often, these conditions send people from one doctor to the next with no clear answers, because the body is screaming what the mouth was never allowed to say. IBS works similarly through what's often called the gut-brain axis. Your gut has its own nervous system, and it is deeply wired to your emotional state. Chronic anxiety, suppressed emotion, and long-term stress can show up as inflammation, irregularity, and pain in the gut, even when every test comes back clean. POTS, or postural orthostatic tachycardia syndrome, is a condition affecting the autonomic nervous system, the part of you that regulates heart rate, blood pressure, and your body's automatic stress response. It's often treated as a medical mystery with no clear cause, but emerging research and somatic trauma experts are increasingly linking it to nervous system dysautonomia, disruption in the vagus nerve, and prolonged childhood trauma or emotional neglect. POTS may, in some cases, be the body saying, I've been overwhelmed for so long, I cannot even stand upright without bracing for danger. What ties all five of these together is this: a nervous system that spent its formative years in survival mode doesn't just turn off that programming once the danger is gone. It can keep running the same threat response for years, decades, even a lifetime. And the body eventually starts to show the wear. I also want to gently name that some of this overlaps with generational trauma, patterns and stress responses passed down through family lines, which is covered in its own dedicated video. So if you've been told that your body is just sensitive or that it's all in your head, I'd invite you to consider a different possibility. Maybe your body has been trying to tell you something for a very long time, and it just has not had the safety to stop yet. Let's talk about ADHD, because so many behaviors that get labeled ADHD are actually rooted in chronic nervous system dysregulation, hypervigilance from unsafe environments, dissociation or freeze states, and a simple lack of attunement from caregivers early on. Here's what that can look like: trouble concentrating, because the brain never fully learned what it feels like to be safe enough to focus. Spacing out or daydreaming, which can actually be dissociation. Poor memory or zoning out. Often trauma-induced brain fog is not a processing deficit. Procrastination. In ADHD-labeled adults, it is often the nervous system avoiding a task it's coded as unsafe or overwhelming. Not laziness, but a freeze and or fawn response wearing an executive dysfunction mask. The task itself is not the threat. Failing, being judged, or not doing it right is. Through the energetic lens, this ties procrastination to a stalled solar plexus, which is your personal power or decisive action, often compounded by root instability, which is the safety to act at all. So the body hesitates because some part of the system does not trust that the outcome will be safe. Often and easily called laziness, when actually it is a nervous system too afraid to move. Next is impulsivity, which is really a fight or flight response showing up in daily decisions. And lastly, fidgeting or restlessness. The body trying to physically discharge survival energy that's had nowhere to go. What often happens next is the child gets labeled special and put into a different class, or labeled hyper or disruptive and is put on stimulant medication, when what they actually needed was regulation, safety, and healing. This connects directly to PTSD and complex PTSD, which is covered in a full dedicated video also. But the through line is worth naming here. A nervous system on constant alert, scanning for threat, doesn't look at all that different from a mind that can't focus. Sometimes it's not that the attention is deficient, it's that the nervous system is doing exactly what it was trained to do. Stay alert, stay ready, stay scanning, all in order to stay safe. OCD is often rooted in chaos or unpredictability in childhood, hypervigilance around doing things right to avoid punishment or rejection, and intrusive thoughts stemming from unresolved trauma. Rituals or obsessive thoughts from this lens are attempts to create safety, order, or control in a world that once felt completely out of control. If you grew up in an environment where you never knew what would set someone off, or where being perfect felt like the only way to stay safe, it makes complete sense that your nervous system would build rituals and checks designed to prevent chaos from happening again. This is not a disorder. For many people, it's a survival strategy that got them through childhood the only way they knew how. The binge-type eating disorders and addiction. This grouping shares something important. Both are often forms of nervous system regulation, emotional numbing, attempted self-soothing, and repetition of trauma cycles. Binge eating, in particular, often functions as emotional regulation, a survival need for control, comfort, or numbing in a moment that feels unbearable. So often, this traces back to childhood associations where food equaled love or food equaled punishment. Weight fluctuations tied to emotional states are not simply about willpower. They're tied to what the body and nervous system are trying to cope with in that season of life. Addiction, whether it's substances, sugar, food, work, sex, gambling, shopping, hoarding, or anything else, works on the same reward and dopamine pathway. Addictions are not bad behavior. They are pain relief in disguise. Restriction type eating disorders, anorexia and bulimia. This pairing shares a different mechanism than the binge addiction group. This one is rooted in control and restriction. Often, this stems from a survival need for control in an environment that felt chaotic, shame or guilt around the body and self-worth, and sometimes even an attempt to disappear or take up less space. Obsessive food restriction shows up especially often in high control environments, where control over food becomes one of the only things that feels within a person's power. This is not about willpower, and it is not about vanity. It's often a nervous system trying to manage overwhelming feelings the only way that it learned how. IED and personality disorders. IED, or intermittent explosive disorder, is often a trauma response mislabeled as a standalone disorder. It can stem from unprocessed rage from early boundary violations, developmental trauma, or abuse, where a child had no outlet or safety to express anger and shame around anger itself, which causes it to come out explosively instead of in smaller, healthier doses along the way. From a trauma healing lens, explosive behavior is often the body saying, I've held too much for too long. The person is not crazy, they're dysregulated, carrying unmetabolized fire that never had anywhere safe to go. Personality disorders, especially borderline personality disorder. They're frequently misdiagnosed in people who are actually experiencing complex PTSD, often stemming from early emotional abandonment or chaos. The symptoms overlap heavily: fear of abandonment, intense emotional reactions, an unstable sense of identity, and dissociation. When we pathologize trauma survivors with labels like borderline, we often end up shaming the very symptoms that are really cries for safety and connection. Compassionate, trauma-informed care is the missing link here, not another label. Dissociation deserves its own space because it ties so directly into one of the four core trauma responses: freeze, which I introduced briefly in part 2 and is covered in its own full separate video. Dissociation can look like feeling far away from your own life, losing time, zoning out, or feeling disconnected from your body or your surroundings. From a trauma-informed lens, this is not a malfunction. It's the nervous system's way of protecting you from something that felt too overwhelming to fully experience in the moment. The mind found a way to step outside of what the body could not safely process. I want to touch on cancer very briefly because it is deeply personal to me and because it deserves its own full dedicated video. I've had cancer 3 times. Traditional Chinese medicine, a proven practice with centuries of history, teaches that specific organs hold specific stored emotions. For example, the liver holds anger and resentment. The lungs and skin hold deep grief and sadness. Dr. Joe Dispenza, who healed his own spine after being told he'd never walk again in the documentary Heal, which explores the profound healing capacity of the human mind, both point to something Western medicine is only beginning to take seriously. The mind-body connection is real, and it is very powerful. Dr. Bessel van der Kolk's work, The Body Keeps the Score, applies here also. Two things can be true at once. Modern medicine saves lives every day, and there is real evidence for the role emotional and generational trauma play in disease. I'll go much deeper into this in its own video. I also want to briefly acknowledge autism because it's part of this larger conversation and because it deserves careful, in-depth treatment of its own in a separate video. What I'll say for now is this: autism is real, and for many people, it's a lifelong neurological difference, not something to be explained away. At the same time, trauma-informed clinicians have noted that trauma can sometimes produce overlapping behaviors. Difficulty with eye contact, social withdrawal, sensory overwhelm, especially in children whose environments did not feel safe. This doesn't mean the two are the same thing. It means the picture is more nuanced than one label can capture, and it deserves the space of its own full conversation. I would like to give you a gentle reminder. You are not a disorder. You are not too much, and you are not enough. You adapted brilliantly to circumstances that asked far too much of a nervous system that was still being built. If trauma creates the symptoms, then safety and connection can begin to heal them. Medication and therapy may help stabilize you, and for many people, they're an important part of the path. But understanding the root can help you heal it. Before we close, I want to repeat something important. None of what I cover today is meant to replace a medical diagnosis, a doctor's care, or your own treatment plan. This is an invitation to explore a deeper question underneath the label, not a replacement for it. Please continue working with your care team and use this as one more lens to consider, not the only one. Remember, awareness is the first step, and healing is the journey home. I'll see you in the next video, and remember, always be kind.